Hey, shalom and welcome to the podcast that I'm doing here with Dina Dai. We're going to have a good time discussing today a very interesting topic that I think you must consider studying, which is new creation motif in the Brit Hadashah, in the New Testament or the Bible. Now, when we study the Bible, sometimes we're not considering different topics within the structure of Scripture. We're only looking at a text that was not written to us, but it was written for us, like John Walton used to say. He still says. And we are trying to apply our logic, our theological definitions, and sometimes even our culture has an influence defining what the text is trying to convey. The problem is the text was not written for us today, to this audience. It was written according to a cosmology perspective, a cultural backgrounds. There was a real world they lived in. We never really studied their world they lived in, the language they studied or they spoke, or the customs they practiced, or the cosmology they believed in. It's like saying astrology and astronomy. There's a distinction. So therefore, what do they mean? What does Mount Sinai represent? What does creation trying to tell us, and how we're going to have recreation being repeated throughout the whole Bible? The story of Noah, a new creation motif, crossing through the Red Sea, a new creation motif, crossing the River Jordan, a new creation motif. Now, let me ask you a question. If Yeshua is coming to bring a restoration of humanity from mortal to immortal, do you think it's only fair to assume and to study the motif of new creation, which is part of my methodology, by the way? If you study with me, you know that I use a methodology. And one of them is new creation motif. Okay, this is just a methodology that I use to study. Okay, so we're going to look into this today. And there was an article written the other day. First, let me say thank you to my friend here who just came. Dina, come on up. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. Go ahead and turn on your video for me.
Okay.
Okay, so how are you doing today?
I'm well. I'm in Canada. The weather's been beautiful, visiting my mom and
Okay.
catching up. Yeah, it's been a nice break. Finished the
Oh,
book and flew up here.
well, that's good. Well,
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. Recently, you wrote a post in which when you wrote, and I understood because I study ancient Near East, and I understand, cosmic mountain, cosmic, um, the whole theme or motif in the Bible.
hmm
And like I told you, when we were talking, some people got all bent out of shape because on the last sentence, as you're focusing on what the presence of God in Ezekiel is trying to tell about removing the presence of God from sacred space, because as you know, sacred space can only continue to be sacred, and God will not remove, it's always sacred, but God will not remove his presence unless there are abominations. And then when there's an abomination, he allows his sacred space to be profaned by the nations. And then he removed his presence because obviously, the place is always holy. It's just that the presence of God is not there like it was in the time of the temple. I hope I'm expressing myself right. So I think people are sometimes so focused on only one aspect of study of the Bible, they're not seeing other things that are complementary to the storyline. And I want us to get together, not only for them to understand where you're coming from, because this nowadays it doesn't take very long for people to take one thing we say and completely out of context. And they don't even bother to really ask us. They assume. And I don't think that's fair to any of us who've been doing this a long time, because as you know, and I know, Dina, that we study different topics, different subjects that maybe they're not the norm within the body of Messiah in certain circles. That doesn't mean that we're better or that they're less. It's just that we have different areas of focus and interest. So I'd like to discuss about the new creation motif in the Bible so that way they can hear from you directly.
Yeah.
What is it that your angle is? So tell us a little bit more about what you meant by the post.
Yeah, so I mean my angle, my focus has really been on creation theology. Like I want to understand what that means because that thread runs through the entire Bible. And it's significant because the ancient world did not view creational order in the same way that the Bible does. I mean,
Mhm.
everything, we talk about creation and chaos, and they're not able as humanity, if you will, to come out of out of chaos, excuse me, into creational order. That is something only Yahweh did in that ancient world and does today. So I'm looking at story after story and thread, all the way through the Bible. What is the aspect of the narrative that God is raising up? How is he redeeming what has been broken? How is he making it, how is he raising up human nature? And how is he delivering human nature? So I'm really kind of focused on that. And as I go through, so the book itself is more focused on that, the revival of creation theology. And what I did in the book, I took we have various myths, and I don't really want to go too much into that, but there's always, every culture had a creation myth, right? That was not uncommon. Every culture had a flood myth, not uncommon. Another area which people are not familiar with is something called a combat myth. And every culture
Right.
had that. So I wanted to look at combat myth and see how is that similar, how is it different. So I took these 8 points and I showed how they worked through the book of Exodus. And then I moved into the New Testament and showed how these same 8 points worked. And then I
Mhm.
kind of concluded briefly showing how these same 8 points work through the book of Revelation. And I didn't go into a lot of detail
Right,
in
right.
Revelation. I tried to make most of my focus on the New Testament. So here's a recap of combat myth and my approach to the Exodus and the New Testament. So you have chaos. This chaos figure rises up. And then you have a divine warrior, which in our case is Yahweh himself, and he rises up to meet the chaos. And the battle ensues, and Yahweh, the divine warrior, defeats chaos. And because he defeats chaos, several things happen, and this is very common in the ancient world. But one of the first things is he's given a temple, or a temple is built for his presence. And we could kind of compare that to the creation story, that starting out in creation of tohu vavohu, sort of there's some kind of chaos going on. I don't exactly know what it is, but in the creation story, God defeats that, and by defeating it, he is given the universe, if you will, for his temple, his place of his presence. And part of the ritual of receiving the temple is that there is going to be some kind of proclamation that's given by a herald, for example, and the
Correct.
herald would go out first and he would declare the good news that the divine warrior had defeated chaos, and you can put whatever figure in there that you want to. But the herald would go first and announce the good news that chaos has been defeated. And then that would follow a procession of some kind. The king on those, what do you call those things? Riding on on the,
Chariots?
yeah, you hold them, a litter, like a
Right,
litter.
right.
And so the king would be processed, if you will, to the temple because he's going there for his enthronement. And you envision the people lining the streets and clapping, making acclamation and homage to the king as he goes by. So there's this whole procession experience. And then once the king or the god or whatever gets to the place of enthronement, which is always going to be a mountain, he has got to ascend. So the cosmic mountain becomes key because that's the location of where his presence will go, where his temple will be built. And the king, the god, will ascend the mountain. And so this is part of the enthronement ritual. And then along with that comes a meal, a special, you always had a meal, and
Uh-huh.
we understand that as a covenant meal. So all these aspects work through the entire story of Exodus, and I break down each one and show you how that works. And then we move into the New Testament, which is, I just keep saying, the New Testament is filled with Exodus language. And the same story is pictured now in Yeshua as divine warrior defeating chaos, the demons, the sickness, all that sort of thing. And he goes through the same process. And eventually, of course, into his crucifixion, which I compared to like an enthronement ritual because it works exactly backwards from the ancient world, right? This is how we see the difference. And then ultimately in Acts chapter 1, we see him ascending the Mount of Olives, after his resurrection and, final experience there. And so when I was writing the post, that's what I was thinking about. So I actually gave no thought whatsoever to the temple itself, when it would be built, how all that. I wasn't even thinking about it. I was looking at it from this creation theology perspective and from the combat myth. And
Well,
so I wanted to just encourage people to understand, and you all know this, that the Bible is just filled with layers and layers of meaning. And
yeah.
when you have an interpretation or a meaning, it doesn't cancel out all the other meanings. And so that was related to a context of Ezekiel's temple. And basically I wrote it and then I left for Canada.
Yeah,
So,
but you know what happens, Dina, is that as I'm understanding new creation, I'm understanding all these motifs. I study with Mark Chavalis too, professor.
right,
So we are permeating ourselves with the context of the ancient world. As you mentioned, a whole bunch of things that are the myth of the ancient world, but yet the reality of that took place in the Bible. The Bible is actually saying it's not El who is the God of the pantheon, is
right,
Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. It's not Baal who is the
right.
Lord of the earth, is Yeshua who now comes riding in the clouds of heaven as the cloud rider. And also people forget that what you described is actually what defines and the climax of the whole story is creating the temple. That's
Yep.
why in Exodus 14, the Lord took Israel to Baal Zephon. You know what Baal Zephon
Yeah,
is?
yeah, yeah,
The
yeah,
temple of Baal
yeah,
over the victory over chaos,
yep, yep,
Yam. So
right.
to me, this is like the prelude to a temple being built.
Yeah,
And, it's interesting. So we look into the combat warrior type thing that every time there was a victory in the ancient Near East, they composed a song of victory, just
yes,
like Exodus 15 and just
yep.
like in the book of Revelation. It's the same
It's all in
storyline.
my book, all of
Yeah,
it.
right?
Yeah, I
It's
covered all of it.
and the sad thing is that because we're not coming in tune with the language of the Bible from its cultural background. Look, I got a whole bunch of books behind me. They're part of Judaism. I've read them. I study them. I don't have a problem with citing and using those resources. The reality is, and this is my contention that I've had even with some of my friends in Israel, as much wisdom there is in their writings, no one can deny that.
Right.
But remember, they're speaking from the sense of their theological religious perspective and their writings, which is perfectly fine. Just like talking to a Christian from their Baptist perspective, they're going to talk about what their experiences are in their denomination. What we're trying to do is we take the story of Moses, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're saying, okay, we can read all the commentaries about Moses, which we could, and I have many of them, and they're not a contradiction. They're talking about Moses, but there are certain things in the story of Israel that could
Hmm.
better be understood in light of the world they lived in. We have to be very, what word can I use? Um, we have to be wiser to think that the Bible was written in a vacuum only in the definition of certain people in the Middle Ages.
Right.
We have to consider that Moses lived around a real country with real cultures,
Right.
language, dialects, myth, and the Torah is trying to combat what the mindset of the people was compared to what the allegiance to God is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is everything I wrote about. I mean, we just, have a little piece here I feel this one particular area, cosmic mountain is just so significant. I mean, Sinai functioned as a cosmic mountain. Zion is a cosmic mountain. Olives is a cosmic mountain. The Mount of Ararat is a cosmic mountain. So
Right.
unique and important creational things happened on top of these mountains. So, in just this one little section here, talking about Cosmic Mountain in the New Testament, and I think we might even have mentioned in our last podcast, but I really spent some time developing that in the book of Matthew because I was surprised to see that there were seven mountains, and I explain all that in the book, possibly eight, which I don't want to get into too much here. and the significance of each mountain, what happens on each mountain, what is Yeshua doing on each mountain. And so I'm just looking at mountaintops as these very significant places where the place of the presence of God dwells. And we can see that, God moved from the mountain of Eden to Sinai, all through. You can see him moving to these different mountaintops and different things happen, and they're all part of the story. And I just want people to understand that this story is very big. And we don't have to get locked into our theological boxes. Again, multiple layers. This is just one layer. This is just one way of looking at it. And so what happened for me is as I got close to the end of the writing, I'm just sort of fascinated by the Mount of Olives because so many unique things happen. Like, what is God doing on this mountain? And they're not overtly mentioned in scripture. You kind of got to figure it out yourself as you see
Right.
the
Well, yeah, that's
God.
true. But
It's not obvious.
but the thing is, it's not obvious to us. We're so removed from the culture, but everyone would have understood.
Oh, sure.
I
Yeah.
mean, to them, that was been like saying, "Where's the meat?" Remember back in the '80s? Hey, where's the
Yeah.
meat? Where's the beef?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Where's the
Yeah. The
beef?
beat.
Or like what was it again? Clap on, clap off. Remember? Clap on. That whole commercial. Say
Right.
that to a kid who was born in the 2015, he would not know what that is.
Right.
And that's the whole idea. It's like, for example, allow me to go through some thematic parallels across biblical and ancient Near Eastern sources so that people can get an idea where we're coming from. I'm a huge proponent of the temple. Anybody who knows me knows that. And to think that only certain aspects have only the only resource for that, I think is not correct. There's a lot of stuff that I've learned from ancient Near Eastern cultures contrasting why the temple functions the way that it does, comparing to what the nations did. It makes sense now to
Yeah.
us studying some of the offerings. Why do they eat certain animals on certain offerings and not the other ones? That has a lot to do with devouring death. And it goes all the way back to Genesis when the Lord says in chapter 3, let us expel them from the garden, lest they eat of the fruit and live forever. I mean, the aspect of eating is what God says in Isaiah 25:8, that he will devour death forever, right? And
Yep.
that's what happened to Jonah. He was devoured, he was swallowed. I mean, the language is so throughout. So watch this.
It's well, and this divine, that's why I picked up on this combat myth theme because the language of divine warrior is everywhere, especially in the Psalms and in the prophets, Isaiah. And
Yeah,
you think about Psalm 15, like the point of the mountain, it's about access, it's about unifying heaven and earth. It talks about who can ascend, who can approach, who may dwell in your holy mountain, those with clean hands and a pure heart. And so you see this mountain theology and that there's one called to be a mediator and the mediator would give his life, he would surrender completely, an act of total surrender to be able to ascend and approach in humility, on behalf of and mediate between God and the people. Like it's so significant. And
yeah,
and so we see all of these things happen with mountains. So,
that's true.
I'm kind of lost in the mountain theme. And this is just one chapter of the book, you
Well,
know.
but the thing is, though, once you understand the mountain motif of the new creation, then it makes sense when you see the transfiguration.
Absolutely.
I mean, that makes perfect sense now. It's like, oh, that's a prophet like Moses.
Yeah.
I mean
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean the Bible
Yeah.
says a prophet like Moses. That's it. That the
Yeah.
whole story was to point to Yeshua as the prophet like Moses, that will be greater than Moses. Let me
So,
share this. Go ahead.
well, I was just gonna, I don't want to go into it all because I want you all to read my book.
No, no, no,
If
wait,
I
wait, wait,
tell
wait.
you it
Stop,
all,
stop, stop,
that's
stop.
not
No, no,
good.
no. I need you to explain to people because that's the problem. They'll read your book, but they need to understand where you're coming from, Dina.
Okay.
Because again, we assume the audience understands everything we're trying to convey. But I really want you to go the extra line to give them the reason why they need to buy the book. Because
Yeah.
if they don't get it, they're not going to follow that thread. They're just going to assume, and then they're going to have their own opinions. And then we have to defend our positions instead of sharing it. And I want them to know where you're coming from.
Yeah, well, and again, sort of the first mention of a mountain, although it doesn't seem obvious in the creation story, they might call it the primordial hillock or, the first fixed um, thing that comes forth on dry ground. Like this is all very much creational language. And so the primordial mountain, and it was the place of, stability and permanence. And that's why it over time became associated with the temple. You would build a temple in a place of permanence and stability. And what happens is the term mountain and temple essentially become synonymous terms. So there's, in their minds, there really wasn't any difference between it. But again, all this story about ascending. So I talked about, just for example, the seven mountains that I go into detail in the book about that are in Matthew and what Yeshua is doing. And of course, one of the mountains is the Mount of Transfiguration, right? And we don't know the name of the mountain, and we don't know the name of the mountain on purpose. But we know that all the language that surrounds the Transfiguration is very much Exodus language, right? And we
Right.
have Moses and Elijah, and Yeshua white, turning, being transfigured before them, kind of taking us back to Moses, yet it's a greater story. And so the seven mountains in Matthew can also be compared to the seven ascents that Moses made onto Sinai. Like there's a lot of interconnection there. And I don't say specifically this mountain in Matthew matches that mountain. I give some suggestions because honestly, there's a tremendous amount of interpretation in this, and I don't want to make assumption. It would just be my assumption. I would let you know. And like I mentioned earlier, some think there's actually eight mountains because Golgotha, in their minds, is actual a cosmic mountain, the place where Yeshua is crucified. There's just a lot here. There's a lot to chew on. And the more that you understand that very important, significant events throughout the Bible take place on mountains because mountains were synonymous with temples. Temples were the place of the presence of God. Temples were the place in which the mediator approached in order to receive instruction and communication with God and then to descend and communicate to the people. So, we got names for mountains, and I love to ski, and we do all sorts of physical, interesting hiking things on mountains. But for the ancient world, these were these were cosmic in nature. Their symbology is really important, and you want to understand the location, who's there, what's going on. The
Yeah.
tabernacle itself was constructed as an image or a replica of Mount Sinai. So, these temples are so tied to the mountain and the mountain theology. It's just striking,
Well, yeah, it's like the divisions of the temple from the outer court, court of
right?
the court of the priests, the holy place, holy of holies, the court of the Gentiles. I mean, the whole mountain was divided like that when they went up to Mount Sinai. Dina, they don't really, many people don't realize that John 1:1, the whole chapter 1, as a matter of fact, is a new creation
Yes,
chapter. Everyone only
absolutely.
focuses on verse 1, and they
Right.
don't realize the whole chapter, when you read it, is returning to order from chaos. And they don't realize it's like a new creation motif that the writer of John is trying to convey to us. That what is happening here is that the Logos, the Word of God, has become known to humanity as the last Adam to bring humanity back to the garden, to bring them life.
Yeah,
But we don't think like that. We
I
think
think
theologically.
your point is really important because we have forgotten that this is about humanity. This is about
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
restoration of humanity. It's not about we four and no more and our little, group. It's about God restoring all of humanity, and He used, His Son, Yeshua the Messiah, for that restoration. And then Yeshua passes that on to us. So we participate in the restoration of all of humanity. Like, what a noble cause. And we
Yeah.
completely forget that we're a part of it.
Yeah. We forget that a lot. Let me give
And
you an
that's
example.
why,
Go ahead.
just that's why I wanted people to see why, all of Yeshua's most significant events take place on mountains. You can take
Right.
that to the bank, and you got to ask yourself, why?
Well, would you agree with me that Adam in the creation story, when he's exiled eastward,
Mhm.
because Adam was what the presence of God dwelled at that time through him. I mean, Yeshua is an Adamic figure,
Right. Absolutely.
clearly, like Noah was, like Moses was, a type, except that this last Adam is the one that actually did the whole work of restoration and
Right.
rectification.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so would you agree with me then that the whole story, okay, is how to convey the message and how God will bring full restoration of humanity from the fallen world into the sacred space?
Bingo. I mean, that's it. And we get locked into these little, we get locked into the minutia of it all, and then we argue over stuff that we shouldn't be
Yeah,
arguing. Our heart and compassion needs to be for humanity because
yeah, I hear you.
humanity is not in a good place. And we
So,
have been, in our lives, we recognize that God has defeated the chaos in our own lives.
yeah.
He has rescued us from ourselves, essentially. And so
You-
all of the form of the combat myth, it functions even within your own personal life to
I
deliver.
mean, I agree with you in the book. Let me give you an example to the audience how even the regular traditional prayers convey this message of new creation motif, specifically the prayer of dismantling the sukkah, which, by the way, I've asked in Israel, hey, what is the meaning of this prayer? It's very unusual. It says, may it be your will, O Lord our God, King of the universe, that next year we build our sukkah with the skins of Leviathan. Now,
It's
mind
in
you,
my book. I've
well,
got that
everything's in
whole
your
thing
book.
in my book.
So all of a sudden, we have this very weird prayer,
Yes.
and the book of Job is referencing the book of Job. But that Leviathan and the dragon and the seven-headed monster is the same one spoken in the book of Revelation.
Right.
So, so wait a minute. Judaism does this prayer, which I do that when we do the Sukkah and we do the Sukkot. But when you ask, to them it's just the traditional prayer to do.
Sure.
But in reality, the message, if we understand cosmology and a new creation motif, that Sukkot is the celebration of the victory over chaos. That's why it's a feast, because
Yes.
it comes after the battle.
So one of the things you have in combat myth at the end, I go into this in quite a bit of detail, is this New Year celebration of the defeat of chaos, and that is Sukkot. It's a very important part of the whole ritual of the combat myth. So, in Babylon, you had your combat myth, the Akitu celebration with Marduk defeating Tiamat.
Right,
You got that whole drill going on. But in God's economy, Sukkot becomes absolutely foundational in that. And this defeat of the chaos figure is represented by Leviathan and the skins of the on the Sukkah. So I do talk quite a bit about Sukkot and tie it in as a New Year's festival, tied also to enthronement and eating the meal. So the covenant
yeah,
meal always went with the enthronement, and then we can see again in the book of Revelation, the great marriage supper of the Lamb is that
right.
covenant meal that's celebrating the defeat of the chaos and the bringing together of the God, or in our case Yahweh,
Well, we,
with
we have that we
people.
have that whole blueprint in Rosh Hashanah,
Yep,
enthronement. Then you have Yom Kippur,
yep,
judgment, the war against abomination. In this case, the book of Leviticus calls it against Azazel.
yep.
Sending it out,
I got
and then
that in the
there's a
book
vic-
too.
and then there's a victory. There's a victory. What's interesting, we also have a blueprint of that in the story of Esther. When the Bible begins the story in the book of Esther with the king of Persia having a major victory, then gathering all the vassal kingdoms of the kingdom, 120, and then guess what? He has a feast, and then he has a wedding.
Yeah,
It's
it's
the whole new
all
creation
there.
thing.
Yeah. Well, I started, so the first mountain in Matthew, of course, Yeshua, it doesn't sound like a mountain, but that's where he interacts with the Hasatan, right? The adversary. And the adversary wants to take control, and it's a counterfeit rulership, a counterfeit sovereign over the world, and Yeshua defeats him by the word. But I was following along, trying to trace like where are we physically, and Yeshua has just been immersed in the Jordan. So you think about Israel crossing over the Jordan. Yeshua
Right.
is immersed there. John the Immerser goes out as the herald, announcing that the good news. The kingdom of heaven is here, and this is the divine warrior who's going to defeat all this chaos that you're experiencing. And it occurred to me, and I can't prove this 100%, so don't throw tomatoes, but it seemed like the Azazel goat, because Yeshua's in the Judean wilderness, ascending. And it's just entirely possible that where the Azazel goat goes off the cliff is maybe in the same region, possibly. So I make that sort of suggestion. It's a suggestion.
Right. So,
And then
so
the
it's
other
your opinion.
yeah, exactly. And the other thing is that Yeshua, comes up the backside of the Judean wilderness and ends up on top of the Mount of Olives. Once again, you got Bethany and Beit Page, Bethpage, and begins the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And I base this too on several other scholars, but you cannot help but read the triumphal entry as a Sukkot picture. I'm sorry, with the, waving
With the
the
palm trees and
yeah, I
waving
mean,
everything. Yeah.
and the clothes on the ground and, riding in on it, like everything about it is Sukkot. Now, whether the Matthew, the writer, wanted us to think about Sukkot, whether it actually was Sukkot, I don't have any idea. Because there's some gaps there in the narrative that possibly it could be, but there's no question there's a tie here. And so he's drawing our attention to the fact that this triumphal entry has to do with the new year, the ritual new year, the defeat of chaos, and the king taking his seat on the throne. And then, of course, he goes into the temple, right, and overturns the money changers. He's dealing with the corruption that's there. So I
Yeah.
hope people can see this is just way bigger. You need to take the time, read carefully, read, whole books, learn the location, the geography of what's going on because that matters. And really that's how ultimately I came to write my post, thinking in those terms, but not at all thinking at all
Well,
about the temple.
but if we understand ancient war uh, victories of the ancient
Yeah.
world and understanding ancient Near East culture in light of scripture, it's only common sense that it ends with the restoration of the throne of the king. In this case,
Yep.
is the throne of God, which is the temple.
Yeah. That's
So, I
why
mean,
the combat myth is so perfect. I was just really stunned as I began to develop it because I was like, okay, is this a thing? And as I got more into it, I could see this is the story. It's perfect. Now, understanding that is how that was their view, that was their lens anciently. And so I wanted to put the overlay in it, but I also want people to understand you're going to have to make an application for today. We don't live back then. We aren't, worshiping on mountains. And I don't know how I'm not an eschatological person. I don't know how it's all going to play out. I'm not offering any suggestions because I don't know. But my goal is to really help us unpack what's going on in the scriptures, to be able to connect. Like, what is that Exodus story that's in the New Testament? How does
uh,
it connect, to
I
that
just
to that story?
I just think that, after reading your post, right, is the last, like I told you, what threw me up for a loop, because I know you. So it's like we've been friends for a long time. And it's like I called you. I said, hey,
Yeah,
did
he
I
did.
misunderstand the last part there? Because you were friends, and I think I did the one thing out of respect to you as a friend, that even if we don't agree on all kinds of other stuff, but if I have any respect for you as a friend, then I will actually call you. Say, hey, tell me a little bit what you said, because maybe I'm missing something. But
Yeah,
when it
so it
says,
was it was written in a historical context, not a
yeah,
future.
I
Yeah,
gotcha. Says
yeah,
the sign of his parousia, which you explained that on the post, is that
yeah.
the Lord's
Presence.
presence is on the Mount of Olives. The end of the age signals that the presence has moved from the temple, on Moriah, temple on Moriah, just as he did in the days of Ezekiel, and Yeshua will ascend to the spot as the king. You're making an alluding point from new creation cosmological perspective to the event of Ezekiel, and then Yeshua ascending from the Mount of Olives
Yeah,
and descending
in
on the Mount
Acts
of Olives.
1. And I mean that end of discussion. It was kind of like that's where I was. I didn't move on future. I
Yeah,
wasn't discounting Moriah. I wasn't speaking about the temple, but just why did Yeshua ascend after his resurrection the Mount of Olives?
got it.
And it's
You
for his
see,
enthronement. Like in
But you
my
see
mind,
what happens? The problem that we have, and let me be straightforward and honest, and I'm going to be transparent. And I know people sometimes assume like I'm mean or anything. I don't mean to, but it comes to a point that as believers and as people who've been doing this a long time, you've been doing it what, 30 some odd years, 40 years?
that would be 47 now.
47, and Joe has been doing it for 44, 45. I've been doing it now for 27 years. And we've been studying different topics, and I have to rectify a whole bunch of things I used to believe 17, 20 years ago. And, people don't ask the source when we come up with certain things. That's why I always use my Bible program open. I give you the reference, I give you the verses, and people don't like it because, oh, that's too much study. We need to be preached to. No, I want you to know exactly where I get the information to avoid this stuff because people no longer ask, and at least to give us the respect to say, hey, I didn't quite understand what you meant. Can you expound on that a little bit? Because in expounding on this, we may find more things where we are that we are in agreement with. It's just that we're speaking different languages. And the moment I read it, I mean, Juan and Danny, my students, they read it, go, yeah, but I know what they meant. They study engineerese.
Right. Yeah.
But,
I mean,
but
anyone that had would, but I regret, but this is what I'm doing. I hope people understand. I really want to encourage you because I think personally, not because I wrote it, but that this book has the potential to be a game changer in terms of how you can understand these layers in the scripture. I really hope people see it. And especially, the sections that I'm really dealing with the New Testament. I mean, I really got in deep there in the New
yeah,
Testament. I felt it was needed because sometimes in our community, we actually forget that
that's
Yeshua
true.
the Messiah has a role and a purpose. What is it? How we've
Well,
sort of, there has to be a balance here. And I
that's
feel like we've been unbalanced or
I agree 100%. And, you know, look, I did a teaching yesterday morning in which I mentioned baptism as a right of resistance
yeah,
against the Roman Empire.
absolutely.
And
Bang
then,
on.
yeah, and then I taught it. I said, guys, to the people in the first century, immersion was more than just a mikveh. To the people of Israel, it's common sense. You do the mikveh, you know that your allegiance and your complete submission was to the God of Israel. That was understood. But to the people coming from the nations, calling Yeshua Kyrios, which was basically master, Lord, it was a subservient type of attack against the empire.
Right.
It was an anti-imperial message. So
Pretty
do
much
it
everything in the New Testament,
pretty much.
anti-imperial language going
So
on in there.
so when you do the immersion, talk about a new creation.
Yeah.
It's like saying, it's not the emperor who has dominion over my life, it's the God of Israel through his son, his resurrection that gives me dominion.
Well,
And to that, so think
he
about
did it
this.
in the same spot that Israel crossed over.
Isn't that amazing? So check this out.
There's a reason that it's in the same location.
So they asked me, I had a question after the teaching, and I told them, I said, look, the blueprint is the same. We're not living in the Roman Empire, but the emperor now is actually Leviathan, the dragon, Satan, Belial, the adversary. And
Mhm.
when we do the immersion and we have allegiance to God through Yeshua as our master, believing that God conquered chaos, death, then we are rejecting this world, and thus we are in the world, but we're not of this world. Now makes sense. It's a new creation motif.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the whole idea of Israel going down into the Sea of Reeds, is new creation. Dry ground appears back to Genesis chapter 1. When they come back across the Jordan River, dry ground appears. They go through the mountain, I mean, the waters and of chaos. And then again in the New Testament, Yeshua goes to the same place and is immersed, and then a voice comes out of heaven, and this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased, which is enthronement language, which is massive pushback against the Roman Empire. This is my son, the son of God, not the one Caesar sitting in Rome. And then what's so unique as this new creation motif happens at the Jordan, and Yeshua is, as I mentioned, is immersed, and then John goes out as the herald and announces the good news, and then in Matthew, he goes immediately into the wilderness to do battle with the Hasatan, the chaos creature, because he has now been crowned and throned, if you will, in some
Right.
way, shape, or manner, prepared, cleansed, and prepared, and his new creation life to go do battle with chaos. And he goes before, the people to deliver them from the demonic and the sick and all the stuff.
Listen,
It's
all the themes,
classic.
all the themes are there. Let me give you some examples. The theme of chaos and order. In the ancient Near East, you have Tiamat and Leviathan. In the Hebrew Bible, you have Genesis 1 and Genesis and Exodus 14. We just mentioned it. In the New Testament, it talks about Revelation 21:1. There'll be no more sea. That's
Right.
chaos.
Yep.
The flood as a reset. We have Atrahasis,
Yeah.
and Gilgamesh in ancient Near East. Genesis 6 to 9 is a new creation chapter. Then you have First Peter talks about baptism. It's a typology of going from chaos to order, from death to life. You have the temple and the cosmos. Ziggurat, that's a
Yep.
cosmic mountain.
Yep.
Egypt's temples and the cosmos. Exodus 20 to 25 to 40, the tabernacle. And then you have Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48, the temple. Then you have
Yep.
Revelation 21 and 22, God's presence as, and the temple on the earth after the Messianic era. It's amazing. Everything's there. I don't know why sometimes
Well, that's
we
what I'm
don't get
hoping
it.
because it's all in my book. Trust me. I worked really hard to try to just to I wanted to tell the story and I wanted people to see the story. Once you see it and you see it, you can't unsee it and you will see it everywhere. And you will understand that this is the big picture. The new creation life is the big picture. And that's, all of you know that that's what Yeshua did for you in your own life. You can point to that moment in which he dismantled all the garbage in you, and we call it salvation. I mean, it is a rescue from the hold that the chaos figure has on your life. And you can call them addictions and whatever you want to call them, but you know the point in which you were set free and delivered. So I don't, unfortunately, in Christianity, we kind of throw these words out in the Christian world, like I've been saved, I've been born again, Jesus saves, without really even understanding what on earth what does this mean? And
Right.
so the bigger picture is this rescue and deliverance, really first from yourself, um, and that needs to happen, and then you go through. Well, never mind, but
I know, I know that there are many people who have different opinions about temple language, temple function,
sure,
the role of the temple. Um, I don't know. I may have some different opinions than you on certain things, but when I study ancient Near Eastern history, like the combat motif and the new creation motif, I've had arguments because right now the thing in the Hebrew roots or messianic, whatever they want to call it, which I'm tired of the whole labels, um,
yeah,
is talk against the people, the land, and the temple. They don't
yeah,
realize. And I'm going to ask the audience this question. Can God, can human desecrate what God has consecrated? Yes. Can humans remove the status of consecration on something that God consecrated? It's two different things. Humanity can profane God's sacred space, but they cannot remove the holiness or the sacredness that God Himself put upon it. In other words, God says, my people are holy, my land is holy, my temple is holy, the priesthood is holy. So therefore, once a king makes a decree, hukatolam, a perpetual decree, that's legal in nature, okay, not time-wise. So that means that those things still hold to be
mhm,
consecrated to God. So when we start speaking against those consecrated things, we are basically attacking the one who consecrated it. And that's dangerous. We
yeah,
don't know the
yeah,
differences.
yeah. We have to be very careful,
Yeah.
and people aren't. We're pretty casual about stuff. And we maybe because we don't necessarily see immediate consequences, so we just sort of carry on without thinking. Um, but hopefully people will begin to appreciate. Again, I just want people to understand that there's just layers and layers of this. And to not be locked in, because I think different teachers have different approaches and God has called them to different lanes. And so we need to appreciate that. And I don't expect, you to be in my lane and I'm not in your lane, but he has given me a place to work and to study and I see this thing. It's just like so clear to me that I want to communicate it to the folks and help them just appreciate, I mean, the depth and just the inspiration and just, the Bible just continually blows me away. Like just when I think I've got a pretty good handle on it, not so much, right? Something else
Yeah.
pops up, some other angle that I didn't even consider. And so truly is a lifetime journey.
Well, personally, I've had to understand also that I have experiences on different things in my personal life. Like, I do martial arts, different types,
Mhm.
and I'm constantly learning and I'm putting myself in environments in which I'm not very successful. And I have to practice, I have to develop, I have to ask questions. I have to look, find what works for me in that environment. When it comes to biblical matters, we have inherited, even following Torah, the same mindset we had in the system of religion, in which I believe this way, this is the most important thing. And if you don't believe like me, then you don't know anything. And I think that when I began to study ancient Near Eastern thing, and by the way, you were there when I introduced the hierarchy or the Suzerain Vassal Treaty at a major conference and revive in Jacksonville that year. You were there, even though you studied it, but I had the opportunity to present it to that audience. And I think you even told me if I was crazy because I was presenting something that it was a little different. But I knew that it would allow us to bring outside the box because the only thing at that time it was being spoken every Shabbat, everywhere, Sabbath, the name Yeshua, and the two houses. Sabbath, Yeshua, two houses. That's it. There was hardly ever a mention of temple because at that time they're not really studying it, and there was hardly anything mentioned of anything outside of culture. And forget about what Jews are saying in Judaism because they're Jews. They don't, what I'm saying. And I
Mhm.
think that's not good to disregard all the tools that can allow us to grow and learn. And the same thing is true on the other side. I've talked to people in Israel who are very amazing minds, but they only think within their own box.
Mhm.
And I come around and say, hey, have you considered this cultural background information? And the resistance at first, but then I felt a little bit like vindicated because the Koren, the publishing house
Mhm.
Koren, they have a series that they have four books: Leviticus, Exodus, and Samuel, and so on. One more book, the Torah portions in the context of the ancient Near East. And I'm going like, what? Finally, we have an or an Orthodox publishing publishing company that is actually showing Torah with its archaeology, ancient Near East, cultural backgrounds, which I
Yeah,
only
that's
think,
great.
yeah, it's amazing. It only complements the message.
Yes,
It only enhances
absolutely.
that. That's it, without
Absolutely.
minimizing anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's really exciting. Hopefully, this will be encouraging and inspiring to people. And, we are so blessed at this period in history. I mean, we have access to everything on planet Earth. I mean,
Yeah, that is so true.
we are without excuse.
For
And,
sure.
even if you don't have a library filled with this, it's pretty easy to find the information and they'll even give you the source, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And so take advantage of it. And, again, I'm not saying I don't want to go live in an ancient Near East world. Thank you very much, especially as a woman. But just learn to recognize the historical context of the Bible. And like you say, the language and the geography and the culture and all those things. Learn those things, appreciate those things, and then you can begin to make an application for your own life. And how does that
Yeah.
apply? And how to, are you familiar with Terence Fretheim?
Sounds familiar, but
He's got a commentary on Exodus, which I absolutely love. Let's talk new creation on steroids.
yeah,
And I mentioned earlier, the tabernacle kind of it functions as a mini Sinai and a mini cosmos.
yeah,
And the idea is to see the tabernacle as really as a mountain, right? That moves interestingly enough. And he said about the tabernacle, he said it functions as the means by which the people of God are able to move in a secure and ordered way through a world of disorder as they journey forward to a new creation. Like, I just absolutely love that. So, picturing us walking through the wilderness desert in a world of chaos, but we can walk with God in a secure and ordered way as we are making our way to the final fullness of new creation, however that looks. And really that's our journey. So it's
You,
probably a good idea to understand it.
it's interesting you're making those points because thinking about what the role of the Torah really is, it's the tree of life. I mean, that's
Yes.
another message. He's trying to take us back to creation every Shabbat when he
Yep.
rests. And then we eat or we listen to the words of God through the tree of life, the Torah. I mean, hello, it's been
Right.
spoken through a man speaking the words so that we can hear, like the work of Adam. I mean, the message is consistent. I really do believe that Israel, as many things within Judaism, can enrich and complement the context of the ancient Near East because it's not in contradiction, by the way.
Right.
It's actually it's lining up with some customs that are practiced. I found in the Bible Lands Museum in Jerusalem that it explains why they do certain things in the custom that I practice because now it has a root. It has a root, not from a tradition without meaning. It's a tradition that has a root in a cultural context that reflects victory over death, or it brings victory over chaos. So therefore, you then all these things you embrace them. You say, okay, I know what I'm doing. Washing my hands before I eat bread on Kabbalah Shabbat. I know what it means. Oh, that's a custom from Judaism. Yeah, but what does it mean?
Right.
I mean, people normally they don't care to know what it means. They just because the Jewish people do it for the Kabbalah Shabbat reception with Shabbat, they reject it. They don't realize they're rehearsing returning to the garden. I
Yeah.
mean,
Everything
even
we're doing.
the
Yeah.
Kiddush that hardly anyone does. By the way, I
Mostly.
travel many places. Friday night comes over, the sun goes down. They don't even care to consecrate the Sabbath as we are commanded in chapter 20, verse 8 of the book of Exodus. It says, you shall remember the Sabbath and make it holy, consecrate it. How do we do that? The Kiddush. What is the Kiddush function? What does it do? It's not the one of the bread. That's part of the whole ritual. Is the verses that you quote out of your mouth from Genesis chapter 1, last verses, all the way to chapter 2, verse 3. And then the reminder in the second part of the blessing of the redemption from Egypt. And
Right.
that's the Kiddush. We're sanctifying the day of our freedom from chaos. And they don't even practice that because, oh, that's Jewish. We don't want to do that. It's sad that
It is.
instead of integrating these things, we are picking sides and disregarding and minimizing. And we
Yeah.
shouldn't do that.
I mean, this is a book for all humanity. There's
What's
no
the
other
name of your
book
book?
like it, never been, never will be.
What's the name of your book, by the way?
I will, but it's not quite ready yet. I'll send you the PDF when I get it.
When is it
We're
coming out?
we're still in an editing phase,
Ah,
right?
how much longer do you think before it comes out?
I'm hoping to release it maybe the third week of September. Be nice to get it out right before Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. That would be really cool.
That's cool.
That's the plan, and sometimes it doesn't always work, but I'm very excited. I really do believe people are really it's hopefully help shift maybe some of our more entrenched ideas and help us to maybe appreciate, especially, I mean, we have so many fantastic scholars that don't get read, and they, just brilliant and presenting, and not everything they write is, we're going to agree with, and maybe not even correct, whatever, but we are blessed with so
Can we
much
talk about
material.
that for a few minutes? I'd like to talk about that point.
Okay.
As you know, the last 15 years, I've made a huge shift in using every resource available, um, regardless of their denominational perspective. I learned that scholars, and you're one of them, um, when they do their thesis or they do their research, correct me if I'm wrong, all you care about is that the facts are correct. And sometimes their lifestyle or their own conclusions are completely different with what they found.
Right.
That fascinates me. It's just I go, how could that be? I mean, but they separate religion and their personal
Yeah.
life with the research.
Yeah.
I
Sure.
can't do that.
No.
I don't do it like that.
Well,
I
that's the
study it because I
difference with
want to.
us.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's the difference with us.
Right.
My life is not a box over here, and my research is a box over there. Like
Exactly.
I'm
And that's
working, it's tracking together.
and this is the reason why I want to talk to you about this because we read a lot of research in which the guys is doing research on a topic. Man, you Meredith Klein.
Yeah,
Meredith Klein has two books, and one of them is incredible. I mean, you read it and you go, surely this guy's an amazing Torah observant.
right.
And then you find out he's a Methodist.
Yeah.
He's still over here. But the research,
So what are
you
you
know,
going to do? Like, do you just dismiss everything he wrote because he's a Methodist and you don't think Methodists know what end is up? I mean, like
well, I
how are
would
you
have
going to
done that 30
respond to
years
that?
ago. I would have done that in where I was 30 years ago
What a
because I
shame.
would
Yeah.
I would only read things that agree with me. You
Yeah,
see, I
yeah.
was that special.
Yeah, right. Well, listen, some of the best temple scholars are Mormons. Like, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah, that's kind of weird. I
Truman
saw one guy.
Madsen, John Lundquist. I mean, there's all, and
Yeah.
I learned a tremendous amount of them. So now I have to decide, okay, they're a Mormon, but yet their research and their scholarship is excellent.
Well, I mean, Roy Gain. Roy
Mhm.
Gain is a scholar for the book of Leviticus. I had the privilege to study with him a little bit and talk to him personally. I have asked him questions. He's an Adventist, but his research on Leviticus, oh, amazing. He studied with Jacob Milgram.
Oh, okay, well, yeah,
I
take that
mean,
to the
Jacob
bank.
Milgram was a conservative rabbi who actually learned ancient Near East, and his work is paramount. If you put in Google it, the best scholars in the book of Leviticus, he's always number one.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
it's like, am I
Well,
not going to read Rashi or, the Rambam or something because they don't believe in Yeshua. So I'm not going to read it because, I mean, again, we only embrace certain things and we disregard others. Why not read it, eat the meat, throw away the bones?
critical thinking skills, exercise
It's
them.
difficult with religion though.
Yeah, it is
When
because
you're
it's
religious,
emotional. Religion's and it's personal and emotional, and we get attached.
well,
But
David de
you need to
Silva.
think critically.
Well, David de Silva, right?
Yeah, not
I mean,
personally.
his book on honor and shame is incredible,
Yeah,
but some of his conclusions I don't agree with.
right.
But his research specifically on honor and shame, oh wow, amazing.
Well, every scholar reaches conclusions based on their research, and the conclusions are generally opinions.
Right.
Right? So,
Well,
I mean,
just
I'm
isn't that the
writing a
time?
book. I'm basing it on scholarship, and I didn't really do a lot of citations in the book. They're kind of in the back in the bibliography, but I've reached conclusions. They're my conclusions. They're suggestions. Consider them. If you think they're wrong, that's fine. But don't just dismiss someone because you think, their opinions are wrong, and just appreciate their scholarship.
Well, okay, so I'm a temple researcher, as you know. I spent a lot of time, effort, and years studying the temple, specifically studying with somebody that you study with, Joseph Good. And
Right.
Joe is an incredible scholar in his own right in regards to certain topics. But when we talk, although he's my teacher, he's open to hear all the sides. And I even in the temple conference that we were doing in Indiana, it was kind of cool because he's making the teaching and he says, by the way, in the ancient world, in the ancient Near East, they will do this. And I was like,
All
cool.
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
but he saw something that connected with what the theme he was
Yeah.
bringing.
Yeah.
It didn't take away from what the Jews had to say or the temple function. It only added by understanding the culture around the time the temple
Yeah.
was the temple stood. Because many people don't realize, and I don't mean this in any way to demean the Rambam in any way, because I read it all the time, and I think it's incredibly valuable as a resource. But it's like I always say, it's so good to read a whole bunch of stuff there, but there's so much more research keeps coming up with archaeology, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I
It's
mean, you
endless.
only,
It's
huh?
endless. It's endless.
Yeah, you use the Rambam as a great foundation. But then when you start researching Charles Wilson, Charles Warren, all the great scholars, Leon Riedmeyer, and all those guys talking about the structure of the temple, the
Right.
function, and then Jacob Milgram's about the sacrifices. It only complements. It's not
Right.
contradicting.
Right. Exactly. And like I
And
said at the beginning, I mean, that's just not I appreciate everything Joe taught me because it was the springboard for me with the work I'm doing now. Like if I didn't understand the practical, physical, structural nature of it all and the processes and the festivals and how everything operated in the temple, I would not be able to write the stuff I'm writing.
You know
Because
what I always tell
that
people
is
about
my
you?
foundation, and then I can just springboard off of it.
You know why I understand you? Because you told me your story about how you were before you came to Torah. You were like what do you call it? A wild child? What do you call it?
Well, I
Wildflower?
was a hippie.
You were a hippie. So if you think about the way hippies think and the
Yeah.
way they lived, it's like, la, 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 let's enjoy life. Let's look for that spiritual application to the world. I think that's really what you're doing. You're continuing that. Sometimes it's a little way spiritual than people are used to now, Dina. Give them a
Uh,
little explanation about the context of what you're saying, because I have that problem. I'm sometimes too concrete.
yeah.
So I'm on the other side. It's like, yeah, spiritual applications are all good, but don't you see that little stone over here? Don't you get it? So it's a balance, I guess. It's a balance of both.
It is. And, there is a certain amount of personality that goes into this, and
Yeah, I know.
it just
It,
is.
but instead of trying to argue about it, I feel comfortable and I appreciate your friendship that even if I disagree with you, I could call you.
Hmm.
And instead of argue about it, I say, hey, why don't we do a podcast so all the audience can know what we talk about and how we deal with these issues and how we can compare notes so we can all learn together instead of talking stuff and then asking the persons their intent. And perception is not always a reality, guys. We
Mostly
know
not.
sometimes we say stuff that you may not agree with us, but maybe you haven't studied it yet, or maybe we may miss the mark and we have
Certainly.
to be
Yeah.
reevaluated, both ways.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, when I think of what I knew at 47 years ago and what I have learned and understand now, that's a lot of years and I've grown a tremendous amount and I have ways to go, but I want to contribute as much as I can while I'm here and to be a blessing to the community and hope that people will take a larger view of things.
I hope so. In the meantime, other than your books, personally, I would recommend ancient Near Eastern stuff. You got the context of scripture by Hallott, William Hallow, ancient Near East text by Pritchard. Michael Morales, I think, is one of the premier guys out
Oh,
there. You
premier.
know, then you have Moshe Wainfeld, John
I will
Walton. He has
recommend
a,
that the Terence Fretheim book on Exodus is just
I
fabulous.
don't know him. I like to get to after we're
Yeah.
done here. I want to get that book.
A lot of new creation language in it. It's very
Yeah,
good.
cool. If you want to know Leviticus, Jacob Milgrom is really good. If you want to know temple, function of the temple, structure of the temple, geography, archaeology, I don't know anybody better than Joe Good,
Right.
for
Yeah.
sure. And
That's
even Jewish eschatology, he has amazing teachings on Jewish eschatology. We all have our roles.
yes. Yes,
And
that's the point. Yeah.
yeah, we have our roles. As long as we don't disregard the holy things. I'm a firm believer, and I know not everybody agrees with me, that the temple will return. I do. I see it, but we have to be careful when we don't study topics to have conversations and opinions about things we never look into. And that's my problem.
Sure.
That you know as well as I do that you can hear someone speak for 30 seconds and immediately okay, I don't think he studies that topic. And then you ask for a resource. A perfect example. I'm having this type of Facebook exchange with this guy who hates the Jews, the land, the temple, and then he even says that the Father died on the cross. That's why he said. And I'm going like, you're out of your mind. That's no way. So he is so anti-Israel that he sends me a website because he's trying to prove a point. And the website that he quoted that always reports about Israel is the most leftist, liberal, anti-Semitic. Now, this is a guy who supposedly follows the Torah. And he gives me the wrong resource. And I told him, I said, are you out of your mind? And this is what you call scholarship. You don't even know what you're citing, and you're doing the opposite. What you just did, you show that you have no idea what you're talking about. And we do the same thing in the biblical things. Sometimes as a teacher, I assume the people know, and we do not go the extra mile to share with them where we get our sources, how we go through that process, and why we do it that way. And maybe if we do that a little bit more, maybe they will be more encouraged and more and how do you say, decided to look more into it. I don't know. Just
Yeah.
me, talking out loud here about how we can improve the communication between us teachers and the audience who want to learn, and maybe they don't have the same time to research as much as we have. Because this is what we do. It's my role. That's your role.
Yeah.
But how can we reconcile both? Because, like you said something before we started recording, the people also have a responsibility.
Yeah.
But how do we guide them through it? That's the challenge.
It truly is. So, pray for us as teachers that we can communicate better with you and help you grow. I mean, that's
Well,
part of why we're here.
but you know what happens to me? I'm going to be a little transparent here. I'll tell you what I know. I know that I don't know because I study so much to know, and I end up thinking I don't know. And then when I learn something, I assume everyone should know.
Right.
And then I wonder, how come they're confused? Because I assumed they knew the foundation. So what I do now, I've been doing this in a local congregation that I've been helping for as a teacher for the last 4 years. I began to develop a methodology, and I began to start doing foundational teachings. Like, I want to talk about this topic, but I cannot do it right away. So I start building up on it
Yeah.
to get to it.
Yeah.
And that seems to be successful. And I'm trying to put that into practice into the English side of it too. So it takes the time.
Yep.
The audience is not patient with us. And I pray that the audience will be, okay, time to be a little bit mature and have an expectation of respect, mutual respect, that if we say something you don't quite grasp, instead of running with an opinion or an assumption, we've been doing this for so long. Sometimes we assume give us the opportunity to explain to you, because you deserve to have that conversation. The audience deserves to have us explain a little bit when they don't get it. But we need to have that opportunity.
That's the beauty of writing a book, because you are able to just really lay it down, explain it, and go into detail where you need to. So I'm going to encourage you all. Hopefully the book's out in the third week of September. It's called The Greatest Exodus, a Divine Warrior Tradition. So
The Greatest Exodus?
The Greatest Exodus, a Divine Warrior Tradition. So, and the approach, as I've mentioned throughout this, is the combat myth, but helping you see that thread all the way through the scriptures.
Is that Greatest Exodus different than the last Exodus that they're talking about in the
Yeah, it
movement of
has
Israel?
nothing, it's in the context of combat myth. I'll leave
Okay,
it there.
gotcha. Dina, thank you so
All
much.
right.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for
I'm
having
so
me.
glad you still believe in the Temple Mount and the holiness of the temple, so that
Yeah.
way people would know.
Yeah.
And but I want to thank you for being willing to have for your willingness to have a conversation.
Well,
And
my pleasure. Thank you for caring and inviting me on,
I
right?
mean, look, we are at the time right now, the confusion is running rampant, not only in the government, in the whole society,
Sure.
but it's creeping into the body of Messiah, if we could use that word, or the kingdom, in which we're no longer speaking with each other, and we are doing what Israel did, a family, a dysfunctional family, all the tribes doing their own thing. And we don't want to wait until all hell breaks loose
Right.
to start the process of communication.
Well, it's the perfect example. We are surrounded by chaos, and Yahweh himself brings order out of chaos, and he does that through his son, Yeshua the Messiah. So
Amen.
make
So
sure
we'll
your
see you guys.
relationships are tight.
That's right. Thank you, Dina, for your time.
Okay.
I want to
Thank
thank
you.
every single one of you for joining us today. Please go to the YouTube, subscribe, like, and share. Let others know. And remember that when you have a question, ask. It's okay. If you do it with respect, we don't mind answering it. But also remember that we have all this time and effort trying to share what we're learning, and understand, at least on my behalf here, that if I'm wrong in something, I'll change it. So just validate what I say. Go look it up. But don't blame me if you look it up and it challenges your theology. It's
Amen.
the information you have to deal with. and it goes from here to here. May the Lord bless you guys and keep you. Thank you for joining us.